Motion Twitch sessions. I'm James Donald, here with Alex Marcolina. We'll be talking today about image hands. Alex will introduce himself shortly. I guess I'll go first. I do. Well, I did an earlier Twitch session on how the Leap Motion controller works. I do a lot of SDK support for various platforms, including the Android platform recently. And supporting the SDK in all forms, including Unity. And how about you, Alex?
And I guess I build and design experiences for VR and AR in Unity. And that's kind of what I do here.
All right, to get started, we should probably say what image hands are, since right now it's just a name. Okay, Alex, what are image hands?
So what image hands are is it's a new asset that we put into Unity that allows in both augmented reality and virtual reality, when you're interacting with something, to actually see your hands instead of a fake representation of what your hands are doing. So previously, in the core assets, we used rigged hands or robot hands or meshes or objects, things that look like hands but aren't your actual hands. And the image hand is a new asset that allows us to, when you're interacting with something, you see your hands instead of a fake hand. And what that allows us to do is a number of different things. I don't know if we're covering those one by one.
Yeah, why don't we cover them one by one now?
Okay.
Applications are cool.
Right. So some of the benefits of using image hands. The largest benefit is obviously that you can see your hand, and that seems obvious, but the important thing is that increases immersion by like a factor of 10-fold, because by seeing your hand, your brain makes the connection that this is an extension of your body. And by having an extension of your body, when you're touching something, you can, more realistically feel like it's there, or you can more intuitively feel where you need to put your hand in order to grab something. By seeing your hand, it makes the connection with your brain, and it just makes the experience exceedingly seamless.
Yeah. And maybe what you can compare it to is without the image hands, we'd have these model hands, these rigged hands, which is based on our 3D coordinates of our joints and our bones, and you can use a model such as the salt and pepper hands, the robot hand. There's the somewhat human trying to be photorealistic hand. We even have a one that's we even call more photorealistic on C++. But these rigged hands, no matter how good we do, especially our C++ photorealistic hand, brings you to the uncanny valley. So that can be somewhat jarring, and most of the apps you might see in the jam, very few of them actually use the human hand. They prefer something like a robot hand to avoid getting into that uncanny valley. But you can leapfrog that if you show the actual hand, whether it's recolored or not. It's just like when you have a photograph of yourself that's annotated, that's a photo of you. You don't think, oh, uncanny valley of myself. And I think this goes back maybe like a year ago. I think one of the earlier demos that really used image hands was the plasma ball, and this one was a prime application because you have this plasma ball, and if our tracking, which was not as good back then, fails, that's okay. You're passing your hand, that may not strike the light in your hand, but it's important to see your hand, and then the physics, if they're behind the plasma ball interactions, that may be okay. And since then we've made into real assets, which is what we're just describing today.
Right, exactly. And kind of along that line, in addition to the fact that it increases immersion, it also can, like you were saying with the plasma ball, it can hide any amount of minuscule jitter or failure. If you're interacting with something and your thumb moves a centimeter in the wrong direction, if you're using a robot hand, you see that, and it's a disconnect, and your brain says, that's not my real hand, and it brings you out of the experience. Whereas with image hands, it's always your real hand, and so even if there's a small jitter or something goes wrong, it's still your hand, and nothing changes that. And so it is it makes the experience exceedingly more robust. It makes it harder to have the application take you out of the experience.
Okay, third benefit, maybe you'll get to this, but for me, lately I'm often working on latency, especially when it comes to Android. We make our tracking as low as latency as possible, but at this time it's still faster to stream images than to do our whole tracking pipeline. So to really minimize latency, at least for what you see, is to just stream the images ahead of the tracking, and it's actually really critical, especially when you see your own hands and you're turning your head. That latency can cause sickness or not. So this is actually huge for latency, and especially on Android, where we have more latency than the PC. It's one way we can sort of somewhat hide higher latency. The latency will still be there for interactions, but sometimes the real signal you get from latency isn't from the interaction; it's more from what you see. So it helps a lot there.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Okay, so we covered some differences of rigged hands versus the new image hands. Okay, how about we talk about some of the demos that are available, and I'll look up the gallery, and I'll post a link to the gallery on the channel here.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what demos have been released for the image hands. Let's take a look.
Sure. So widgets would be the second one we see in the gallery. I can post this link. Can you talk about widgets here?
Like widgets in particular, or image hand with widgets?
Yeah, I guess the latest widgets just has image hands, so it's the same thing now. Yeah.
Right. So widgets is the widget demo itself is an example of like buttons and sliders and different ways to interact with GUI elements, and it was the demo that used the robot hands, if I remember correctly, before. And the widget demo as it's now, it uses the image hands, and it's kind of an example of how, just a base example of how the image hands can both increase the immersion of an application, but also B, it was exceedingly simple to implement the image hands into this application. The image hands are very versatile, and they can just kind of be plug and play it into most any application that's already using an augmented reality setup or virtual reality setup, like the VR widgets. And so in this case, the widgets are a great example of both the immersion as well as ease of integration.
Yeah, and I did mention earlier that Plasma Ball, which doesn't use the assets, was sort of kind of an earlier example that really used the images while separating that from the physics. Since it was older, it lacks things like our cool glow outline we'll get to later, but it's one of the earlier examples you can look at. How about, can we talk about Elemental, Ghost Story?
Right. So Elemental is another VR application that it's a game that also originally used not the robot hands, but a non-human, non-image representation of the user's hands. And it's also an application that was fairly, I think in less than a day or so, easily converted to using not just the basic image hands, but a custom version of the image hands that was suited for the application. I believe it's like if you go look at the application, it's a blue hand for the left, a red hand for the right, and they still have, even though they're image hands, they still have the circular graphic in each palm that you're using to spawn the spells and things. And so that's an even better representation of, the image hands are providing the seamless experience, while you can still augment it with colors, things that matter for your game, or even virtual objects that you can inset into the palm, or other things that can be related to these physical hands. Kind of augmented reality, but for your hands themselves.
Yeah, I think this segues into how hard or easy is it to put image hands into your project?
Right, and it is actually very simple to put image hands into your project. One part of the effort in creating the image hands was to make sure that all of the work that needed to be done was centralized in locations that made sense. So And that kind of manifests itself in a lot of the different things that we're going to be talking about, how image hands work and how they interact with things. But in general, if you have a pass-through camera rig, if you have a camera rig that is doing pass-through, all you need to allow image hands to work is drag the prefab into the hand controller, and that's it, it works. That's all there is to it, to integrating image hands. It's exceedingly simple and straightforward, and it supports things like unplugging devices, whatever situation that you have. And I don't know if we're talking about this on the list, I think maybe near the end, but just kind of the, in general, image layering system, that kind of the back end to the image hands. But integration is very straightforward if you have a pass-through camera rig. And if you don't have a pass-through camera rig, creating a pass-through camera rig is also very simple. I believe we have a prefab for a pass-through rig already in the core assets. So if you're like starting out creating a scene, it's completely straightforward. Just drag the prefab in, you have your camera rig, and it's done. If you want to convert a camera rig from whatever standard camera rig that you have into a pass-through camera rig, that's also very straightforward. It only requires modifications to the camera rig. You don't have to like touch other game objects to make them behave, or touch project settings to make things work. It's just dropping a couple components onto the camera rig in the right place, and that's it.
I guess why would I want to keep my old camera rig? Is it because I just put some settings on it for Oculus, perhaps?
Well, one good example is, let's say you're making a game and you have a lot of complicated image effects, for example. Instead of starting with a new camera rig and like recopying all of your image effects over this new camera rig, you can just add one or two components to the left and the right eyes, and you're good.
Okay, one or two components. I do also have to put a certain quad in there.
If you want like a background around you, then you have to put basically a screen in front of the camera. If you don't want the background, you don't have to. Oh. So it's modular in that way, that you only need to add a game object for the effect that you want to see. If you want to add image hands, you put the image hands into the hand controller. If you want a background, you put a screen in front of the camera with the appropriate material. If you want to put an overlay, you put another screen. If you want whatever thing that you want to be affected by the image pass-through, it affects only that object. You don't need to touch anything else.
Okay. Yeah, perhaps going in a bit of depth due to my experience of putting those components onto an existing camera rig. Mm-hmm. There's the there's part one, and there's also the depth buffer.
Right. So that gets into a little bit more of the effects.
Mm-hmm.
So the and perhaps first we should talk a little more, and I think that's for later.
Okay.
But for the image hands, there's a glow outline that when the hand is being tracked, you see your hand, but you also kind of have this gently glowing blue around the hand, and that's kind of a symbol to show that your hand is being tracked. We know it's being tracked, and you know it's being tracked. But in addition, when you're talking about the depth buffer, that's for an additional effect which can also be used to help increase immersion. With the image hands, it's not just an overlay. It's smarter than that, and you can actually get depth information from the hand. And what I mean by that is, if you have a cube in front of you in augmented reality, and you have your image hand, and you move your hand, forward and into the cube, it will actually, the cube will occlude the hand, and you'll see that your hand will sink into the cube as if the cube was actually there and made of jelly or whatever. And so that's something that's different than just overlaying the screen with like a cutout version of the image. It's actually a 3D model that uses the image to represent how it looks. So you get all sorts of neat occlusion effects. You can move your hand around an object and it affects properly. And with the depth buffer, the material that we have on the default image hand has a neat effect. When you put your hand into an object, the outline where it is intersecting can glow. And that provides an excellent depth cue, so you know exactly where your hand is. And that both gives really great feedback in terms of, interacting with things, but once again, it also just ups the immersion factor because you know exactly how you know exactly how your hand is interacting with this virtual object the way that it should be, and that matches up. It's all consistent, and it creates a really fluid and natural experience.
Excellent. So that covered what we wanted to talk about, the glowing outline. One question when I asked the audience. Reality Check Dev will be importing image hands tonight, but I just want to check the status of some of the other developers here, like Alquera, Cart5250, Devilish, Rocket, Nomad. Welcome all, but we're just curious where you guys are and whether you've developed a Leap Motion application already that may already have image hands, or you're looking to put in, or maybe you're not a Uni developer, maybe you're a Leap Motion JavaScript developer, but we'd just like to know what sort of things you're working on so we can best answer what you're most interested in. So feel free to type on the channel and say something about yourself. Okay, now let's, we talked a bit about the cues. So how does having a hybrid of AR and VR, and that could be other stuff as well as your hands being in virtual hands versus the augmented hands, but how does that really enhance the experience?
So we're talking about a hybrid of AR and VR being your hand is augmented reality because it's your hand, and virtual reality because you're in a virtual environment. So it enhances the experience because when you're in a pure virtual environment with nothing, no pass-through, nothing at all, you're creating an entirely new reality that you're putting the users into. And that can be inherently tricky because you're forcing the user to accept an entirely new reality that's completely different than the one that's around them. And unless your design is perfect and you have every little thing tuned perfectly, then it might not be at 100%. Whereas if you kind of mix in a little bit of augmented reality, if you bring in the user's hands, if you have like a window out into the real world, then all of a sudden you're not creating a new reality, you're modifying a current reality. And that can be a lot more forgiving on how the brain perceives what's going on. Because we're putting a person into a situation that is not physically possible, where they're flying through space or something. By introducing a little bit of reality, it kind of ties it back to something that the brain can understand. You can see your hands, your hands, and it anchors you to the real world, and you can accept that everything else is similarly real, and that fusion of augmented reality and virtual reality gives you the power of immersion that the real world offers, as well as giving you the power to create a virtual world as dynamic or rich as you want.
All right, so we have a question here from Kraken, who asked, has Leap had a lot of interest from VR AR headset makers wanting to integrate Leap into other devices? Sure. So first off, I'll talk about some integrations. It's a non-AR integration, a non-VR integration. This is the Leap Motion HP USB keyboard or laptop integrations. This is one of our early integrations, so we're integrating devices, non-VR devices, so you can buy a Leap Motion keyboard, which you can type on, as well as use swipes mostly for desktop usage. But in the VR world, among deals that we have announced, so the Razer's building the OS VR headset, open source VR, and we're in a Leap Motion. There's the upgraded pack will have the Leap Motion integrated into a plate that you just snap on. You can even snap off for the headset. So that's one deal. But we're hoping to integrate into more headsets. We would like to be the fundamental input for all of virtual reality. So that should, with our plans, that's just the beginning. I think you also mentioned the Dragonfly Prototype. This won't be used in the Razer headset, but this has more features that we're working on, not just in this prototype, but in our hardware roadmap, which go into better things like VR. You can see your hands, but once you go into augmented reality, well, if your hands are in black and white, there's some, you'd like them to be in color. So Dragonfly can put your hands in color, which yeah, then you really know that they're your hands. In addition, there's other augmented reality cues like seeing the world around you as well, so you don't crash into things, which can be disorienting when you're in the world of VR.
And I'd like to interject with a quick, very useful use for integrating augmented reality into a virtual reality environment. Exactly along those lines of not running into things. One of the common things that we do in some of our internal demos is, even if it's a completely virtual, experience, and we're using image hands, and you're like, I don't know, in a crate somewhere, or in a facility or whatever. We have a very thin layer of pass-through that's in front of everything. And what we do is we threshold the brightness so that only like the top 50% shows up, and then we overlay that 10% over the scene. And what that means is that in general you're not really noticing it because it's only the top 50%, and we're tuning that down to 10% opacity. So it's very, very thin. But if you get close to something, all of a sudden it gets very bright, and you can see it. You can see it kind of fading in like a ghost into your virtual environment. So normally it's not intrusive because you can't see it. But when something becomes important, like someone's walking up to you, or you're walking towards a table or a wall, it kind of fades into the scene, and you can prevent yourself from bumping into something or hitting someone in the head or whatever. But it's the kind of advantage that you get from merging augmented reality and virtual reality, one of the advantages.
Great, okay. Another question pops up from Reality Check Dev. Will we ever be able to use multiple Leap motion controllers? So what this can mean is, well, here I'm holding two prototypes, but imagine if you're on your desktop, you want a space he's a couple feet apart, and now my interaction space possibly has doubled or more than doubled, or even my accuracy is improved. Those are some of the things we've worked on for a while. The software doesn't have any public option to enable that, but it's still something we consider from time to time. But this example here is really not for virtual reality unless I guess, attaches to your suit. So for virtual reality, someone may more imagine if you have a headset like this, the Samsung Gear VR, you may imagine strapping a Leap that's pointing up here as one that's pointing, say, downward to increase your interaction area. So if you do something like steering wheel effects where you're not necessarily looking at the object. So it's something we consider for virtual reality. Now, there are issues with that. Largely, it's more hardware, so it's more expensive. Although mobile VR is pretty expensive already. But the mobile VR is also very power limited. So there's a lot of drawbacks to using two devices there. So it may not be the way to go forward, at least for mobile VR, or even for desktop VR. There's other ways to improve the experience for VR is just make the hardware better. So we always work on ways to improve the field of view and the range through algorithmic or as well as hardware changes, and that may be more viable than adding two devices for VR. With desktops and rooms, it's another story, since I guess there's always more space in the room, and some people may want to just make these like mega rooms for VR. But yeah, sorry, not for VR, I guess for interaction rooms where you just kind of go in and interact with things, possibly in a non-VR world. But yeah, it's definitely something we're working on, yeah, good question. All right, we have another question here. Would it be interesting to use Leap Motion with finger skateboards as a controller to a skateboarding game? Oh, this would mean, okay, so not walking, but leaning on your fingers like that. Okay, what do you think of that, Alex?
I think that would be definitely very possible. And that kind of, there's the common limitation. You can only track hands that you can see, but you're never going to be playing with a skateboard that you're like not going to be looking away from something that you're skateboarding. So it's definitely very viable. And what was it was like a craze like 10 years ago. It was like Tech Deck or something. You remember? I don't know.
I'm not a very good gamer.
Oh, it wasn't a video game. It was a physical thing. You could actually buy like little tiny skateboards. You could kind of skate them around with your fingers. It was Tech Deck, yeah. I think it would be very interesting to try to kind of recreate that in a virtual environment, especially in an augmented environment where you're using a virtual skateboard to skate around an actual, like your actual table, your actual areas, and that kind of opened the way for impossible stunts, like you fly up into the air and you like throw it and like gravity slingshots back to your finger. In virtual environments, you can do whatever you want. So that kind of opens the door for a lot of really interesting tricks or experiences that way.
Yeah. One thing this does remind me of, we do have some examples of not just skateboarding with fingers, but there's a walker where you can walk with your hands. That's by Jonathan Selstad. His screen name escapes me at this moment, but that's somewhere on our forums. There's also a game from our VR, our game jam last year, a non-VR game jam called Ferrari Cops, and you're not a skateboard, but you're a car, so your hands like this, it's multiplayer. So there's a lot of cool non-VR stuff you can do where your hands pretend to be a vehicle or a skateboard of sorts. Can the mic be turned up? Very hard to hear. Well, I can move closer to it. Okay. All right. Oh, and Mr. Tabs, it could be the mic, but it could also be the volume on your computer. So just may want to try turning that up. On Windows, if you go to the bottom right corner, there may be multiple settings that override speaker volume. Your speaker volume as well as some other override volumes. So check that. Okay, Sebastian Binet asks, is there a plan for a wireless leap motion sensor? Did we get this question last time? I'd say this is something we occasionally investigate, and I could say there are trade-offs with wireless. One of the biggest trade-offs is the latency. When we started looking at the time, even stuff like Bluetooth 4 didn't have the latency. We would much worsen the experience on top of the latency that we have currently. So that was a concern. Power is a bit of concern too. And I guess any wireless product has its challenges. So for virtual reality, it's certainly not a focus, given that the leap will be on the headset, so the wire is really short to the headset. I think that's what we can say with respect to this talk here about image hands. Okay, volume is good, according to Reality Check Dev. Great. All right. Tman0003 asks about our future product plans. Let's see. There's limits to what we can say on a Twitch talk about our future products. We covered some things that we've worked on at the earlier talk on how does leap motion sensor work. We've mentioned Dragonfly here. This is not a product here, but this shows some of the potential for things like color. I think we mentioned Meadowhawk. This is an automotive demonstration module. So with automotive, should be automotive grade. Should be big and reliable. But this thing has particularly a lot of LEDs because it has to work in sunlight, since usually people don't drive indoors. So
Generally.
Yeah. So we're working on a number of those things, and our biggest focus now is virtual reality. So as we mentioned, the Razer OSVR headset is in our roadmap. Should be released sometime this year as a dev kit, and we're looking to be the input mechanism for all virtual reality headsets. So if our plans really went the way we want, our future plans would include just being in every virtual reality headset. All right, looks like we have no more questions from the channel. Let's move on to our script here. Okay, let's see. We have a question about how does the ability to pass through or disappear behind objects change the experience?
Right. So that draws back to the kind of the sense of immersion. If I have like an object and I'm moving my hand around it, behind it, up and down. If this is just a simple overlay on the screen, no matter where I move my hand, it'll still show up in the front, and that's no good. That breaks immersion and doesn't make sense. And so it's not you have no sense of like, oh, is my hand behind the object? Is it in front? We kind of lose the sense of depth, and it just all falls apart. But by having an object that actually exists in the 3D scene but is also your hand, you can put it behind an object and it will disappear like it should, or you can kind of partially occlude it and it'll disappear where it should, and you can bring it in front and it'll be in front like it should. It's just trying to mirror what would actually happen as much as possible, so that it appears to your brain as though everything's as it should be. kind of fooling your brain into thinking that this virtual object that you're interacting with is actually real. Because the more that we can, make that experience as seamless as possible, the better, better experience it is. And so, just in general, making your hand respond to objects in a physically accurate way is going along the direction of making it more seamless and intuitive.
Great. Okay, we suddenly got 3 questions on the queue. I'll answer them in reverse order. So Travels by Fire asks, could we add leap motion to the car dashboard? So remember our prototype automotive module. We have this to use for CD radio controls, and definitely, as we've demonstrated to our partners, we've been seeing our partners who demo at CES. Yeah, most of the focus is on stuff like controlling your music. That's sort of just the beginning. We start with simple stuff. It's safe, but eventually people want to have a full heads-up display that you can interact with any sort of content, whether it's your maps or just checking on your kids at home, or maybe Skyping for the passenger seat. So yeah, there are no limits to what you can do in the automotive world. Unfortunately, the automotive world does move a bit more slowly than some things in consumer electronics, since these things need to be qualified and then planned out several years out. But yeah, there's a lot you can do there. Okay, question goes back to, let's go back to multiple devices. So T-Man003 asks about any idea for a more complete grid of leaps, kind of like a mini version of what they did with Vive. For those who, some of you may have heard of Lighthouse, and how you can track multiple objects in an entire room. And I believe T-Man003 is asking about how we can use multiple leaps to do a similar effect to track multiple objects in a room, or at least have the person walk around and their hands can be tracked anywhere. Some have looked into this. So this is more. So as we mentioned, for multiple devices, you could get more accurate tracking, or you can just increase the range. So for increasing the range, you can use multiple leaps. In fact, some people have done this by, you can plug in multiple leaps. They put them in virtual machines, and just unify the areas. That's an easier problem than improving tracking. So that can be done. It's not a virtual reality focused thing, unless I guess if you're moving around that room with a headset as well. But then if your leaps on your headset, those other leaps don't help so much. But yeah, this has been experimented with. It just may not be a big focus for our virtual reality, where we have other solutions to keep the leap next to you, like it just being there. Next question comes from, what are we most excited about? This is a 2-part question for Reality Check Dev. So yeah, let's do part 1. What are you most excited about when it comes to the current VR challenges?
Let's see, what are we most excited about? What are we excited about as Leap Motion?
Yeah, as Leap Motion.
Let's see.
Or even, what are you most excited about? And I'll give mine for that.
Let's see. Probably what I'm most excited about is the ability to extend normal interactions in ways towards natural conclusions that are not physically possible. So kind of taking back to the tech deck example, or various other examples. It's really it's hard to say. It's really fun to be able to interact with an object in a way that you would expect. You can grab a sphere and move over here. You can touch things like you would normally expect. But then to extend it out into things that are impossible is really what makes the experience really amazing for me. And so just kind of pushing the boundaries of what is possible to put someone into a space and have them, have an experience that's, like nothing that could ever be experienced before is really what makes me excited about VR and AR.
Yeah, for me, probably because of what I work on, I'm most excited about mobile virtual reality. So I think I held this up earlier. Here's a Samsung Gear VR 1. So my Leap has dropped out of it, but I can put the Leap in there. But yeah, the challenges with mobile VR, there's enough challenges even without Leap Motion, but a lot of those are being solved, and Samsung may have a product in the coming year, a consumer product. They certainly have a dev kit now. And yeah, using Leap Motion for mobile VR excites me. For virtual reality, for me, it's a lot about sharing that experience. Like I like Google Cardboard, just the ability to just take it off, put it on someone without saying, "Come to my house and hook up all these cables on you." And to me, leap motion is the only solution where you can share a hand tracking thing. The competitors like Lighthouse, well, we're going to have gloves or something on there. Or 6 Sense Stem is this big heavy thing, so I'm not going to put that in your back to share it. So to me, yeah, using leap motion in mobile virtual reality, so we can share virtual reality and just see people moving their hands around, not just saying like, oh, I'm limited to this thing here because that's all Gear VR can do. Like that excites me. And there are challenges there are from a performance perspective and power perspective. Those challenges that can involve improving our algorithms as well as using the right hardware, the right coprocessors to work on mobile devices. So that excites me. All right, let's go on to part 2 of Reality Check Dev's questions. So what did we expect to see during the Indiecade that didn't get made? Let's see. This is referred to our first jam. Okay, so yeah, Indiecade sponsored the first Leap Motion game jam. This was not a VR jam. This was a general Leap Motion jam. Although some projects were virtual reality, and that was great. So and some of the top winners included. Let's see, there was a Sleepy Hollow game that had some of this non-photorealistic rendering. There was I think one of the winners was Weightless, Spending Time in Space, and Elemental Ghost Story, which we talked about here. That was one of my favorites. Now in terms of what didn't get made, especially when I looked at the winners and like who do I want to win, I felt there was a lack of productivity apps. I felt like it was a lot of games. I mean, it is a game jam, so that might be why. But when we ranked the winners, there was at least there was at least some people attempting to make a productivity app, but it seemed like it was that guy versus 99 other entries, which were all games. So I wish I'd seen more there. Just like virtual touchscreens, or there's most of our time, at least for me, I don't play games most of the day, so I'd like something to help me, outside of games, whether it's my work or just interacting with computers, but not playing games. How about you, Alex?
I was not around when the Indiecade was going on, so I have seen very little of what was going on during that game jam. I remember playing Weightless, and that's about the extent of it. Mm-hmm. I myself do play games basically all of my free time. Mm-hmm. So I think what I'm looking for from game jams in general are just using the Leap in a way that kind of forwards Leap as an input device in general. And let me elaborate on that a little bit more. The Leap itself is a very powerful input device. Like Kraken had made a comment here talking about how when anyone puts on an Oculus or a virtual reality device, they immediately hold up their hands and they say like, oh, okay, that's right, I don't have my hands. I don't have my hands in VR because I'm wearing a giant camera on my head. But just the fact that everyone immediately picks up their hands and tries to see their hands just shows how important it is to be able to interact with things using your hands when you're in a virtual space. And so I just love seeing all of the different unique ways that that people both in games and also applications as well just manage to incorporate using your hands, interacting with the application in ways that make sense and are interesting and are fun. And that's not a comment that was something that was missing from Indiecade. It's just something that I like to look for in search in general.
Okay.
Do you guys want to do the demo and then get back to questions?
Yeah, let's do the demo.
Okay.
It's better to have pictures here before we talk too much about it.
All right, so this is an internal demo that I've been working on for a little bit, and it is we're going to be using it to showcase how the image hands kind of work and function. So I'm in this kind of frosty environment, and because I'm in augmented reality, I immediately, just a second, I need to tune the Oculus, it's not calibrated right. There we go. Bear with me just a second.
Yeah, you guys are screwdriver for that. Your VR has this little dial thing.
Here,
Makes it easier.
You can use a key.
Yeah, maybe the consumer version of Oculus will have a easier way to change the focus.
All right, there we go. All right, so I'm in a a kind of foggy environment, and immediately you can see that if I look to my left, I can see James over here.
I have hands too.
And that's the kind of what we call the thresholded overlay. So in general, I can see the scene, but anything that is bright kind of goes its way into the scene, so that I can be aware of things that are around me. And then since this is VR, I immediately want to put my hands up, and so I bring my hands into the scene, and they are visible. And these are my hands. It's completely responsive, and when it doesn't matter what my hands are doing, I can still visually see them, and they're my hands. And then the second thing that you notice is that it has this kind of very soft blue glow around the edges, and that's to show that these hands are being tracked. If I bring them in at a very strange angle, you can still see them, but they're not being tracked. And that's another part of the threshold overlay, is that you can still see your hands no matter what, even if they're not being tracked. And that's really important, so that if tracking fails you for half a second, you're not like, oh wait, where did my hands go? So we have hands, and we managed to get them reflecting into the water. That's kind of a custom hacky effect, but it's all about increasing the immersion. And I want to interact with something like this sphere. I can put my hand behind it, I can put it in front of it, and it interacts properly in terms of occlusion and things. Put my hand underwater, and it interacts properly. And this is all just an example of how how increasing the immersion is all about increasing the way that your object interacts with the world in a realistic way. Every level that you add that puts your hands into the scene really just increases the level of immersion, increases the level of believability, so that when you interact with something, it's completely fluid. You can just okay, yeah, let me just grab this and move around, and it's completely fluid, and there's nothing that stops you from feeling the experience.
Cool. Hey, do you want to, maybe we can answer some of these questions while you have it on.
Okay.
It's visual. So how can developers utilize the glow confidence for testing while they're prototyping?
Okay, so one thing that we get by having this augmented hand is that this glow is controlled by the game software. So based on confidence, you can change the amount that it glows, and you can kind of so that's not that's not 100% working right now. But one thing that can be done, I believe this works in the core assets. This might be an old build, but the glow can be based around confidence, and so the less confident that the hand is, the more the glow kind of fades to gray, and that gives the user a very clear knowledge. Blue, that's tracked. Gray is not tracked, and so as it fades between blue and gray, you kind of get a sense of how well your interaction is going to be, and it kind of leads users to making gestures that are very solid and very powerful, and you can kind of use that glow to your advantage to give immediate feedback.
Yeah, that answers how it helps for feedback on the tracking confidence. Very useful. Okay. Okay, now this may be a harder question, but what are the UX or UI design implications for this asset beyond just hands?
Right, so that references back to what I was talking about before. The tech behind the image hands is not just specific to hands. In this case, we're using it for the threshold overlay as well as the hands. But it can be used, the hands is just a special case. Like one example might be let's say you want your keyboard to always show up in space. Well, if you know where it is, you can put an object in Unity that uses this image effect, and you put it in the same place where your keyboard is. And then what that does is your keyboard will now show up in the virtual environment exactly how it is in real life. So you can use the image effects to really cause anything that you want to show up in virtual space. So if you want, if you want like a window into the real world, you can create that using the image effects, because it's all just passing the pass-through from the real world into your environment. So you can use that to, whatever you want, even past hands themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would require, well, works better if you can know where the object is, which hands we provide an API for, tools we would provide an API for now as well, so you could do that. And we saw on the forum somebody made a keyboard demo where you just know where the keyboard is because you're typing at the keyboard, you can tell what keys are hit. So that could even work there as well. So with the API available now, that could be done. We may not track arbitrary objects, but there's still a lot you can track beyond just hands with images.
And it doesn't have to be a tracked object in the real world. Like one example would be like you have a cube in space, but when you look through that cube, you can see into the real world. And so it's not a physical object, but it allows you to peer from virtual reality into the real world, and you can use that to like there's a bunch of different mechanics that you can use to make that an experience.
Yeah, as we're on that, I'll answer a couple questions quickly. Can it track feet? No, we don't track feet at this time because, we focused on things like hands and tools that matter a bit more in virtual reality. Feet have applications like Dance Dance Revolution outside of virtual reality. But we do provide an image API, so if you would like to track feet using, say, an open source algorithm, via OpenCV, you can do that. Use your image API, plug it in, and that won't work as it's not optimized as well. You may need a very powerful computer, but you can experiment and try to improve things from there, because it's an open. The image data is available, and you can use some open APIs and try that out, even if it's not our focus, because we're focused on virtual reality. And someone else asked about tracking various tools or boxes, and when we say tools, we generally mean straight tools like pens or a screwdriver. We don't track boxes at this time, and our recent releases haven't focused on tool tracking, since virtual reality has often been more about hands, but that functionality is still in there, and in some ways it can work better than hands just because it's in some ways an easier problem for straight objects. So that's still there. You have to check a checkbox, but straight tools are still there. All right, let's answer a final image hands question in the script before we go back to the questions that aren't so virtual reality or image hands related. So, Alex, where do you see image hands going next? What sort of enhancements do you really want to see?
Well, one enhancement that I would really like is, it kind of relates to the ability to see my hand in the reflection. So all of these effects are based on the images that the Leap device provides. And what that means is that, I have my hand, I can look at it. If I wanted to look at it from a different angle, I wouldn't be able to, because I can only see it from the point of view of the Leap device. And so one thing that I would really enjoy would be the ability to map this image onto an object so that I could look at it from any perspective. And that's, that would allow us to do proper reflections. It would allow you to more easily see things from a different view. If you're doing a multiplayer game, you could actually see the hands of another person properly. Their actual hands instead of a robot hand. That's kind of one direction that I'm excited about, just kind of improving the way that hands are brought into the scene, such that different limitations and different issues can be resolved to the point where we really just make the boundary between virtual hands and real hands basically indistinguishable. And then the other thing is that I would really just be interested in exploring the amount that image hands can be used to interact with things, to increase the immersion. Up till now, we've been using robot hands and things, but as soon as you start, allowing the hands to be real, that really opens the door for a lot of really more immersive experiences in that way.
Great. I think the last thing I'm supposed to mention here, let's see the right link here, view form. Okay, so there's the Leap Motion Hands-On VR Challenge. This is it's like a mini jam due June 23rd. So I'm just learning about it now, but I mean, game jams are awesome. So if you're interested in making a project from scratch, or even just adapting an existing project, really easy to just drag your hands in. You can join this jam and have a chance of being a winner. And the prizes are somewhere here, but beyond the prizes, just it's an amazing way to just if you have a great app, like say let's say After Effects Elemental Ghost Story, which is in their previous jam. Not only was he a winner, but we can reconnect the developers successful and help you with your next stage, which could be even another jam, or you may be involved in some of our demos as well. So yeah, I highly encourage any of you developers to look at this hands-on VR challenge and see if you can put together a submission by June 23rd. All right. I think we covered most of the image hand questions. Maybe, Alex, let's take off the headset now and get back to normal Twitch mode where you can see our faces here.
All right. And there we go.
All right. So while we focused on image hands, there was a backlog of a few other questions. So hopefully Sebastian Binet's streaming problem was resolved, according to Reality Check Dev. Great. Okay, so let's go a bit back here. So Mr. Tabs asked, does tracking work well in low light situations? Or the subjects need to be well lit? So low light, low light we actually do great because this is active infrared, as they call it. These LEDs are blinking, blinking several hundred times a second. So yeah, we work fine in low light conditions. That's different from other track situations that may use like a webcam, where you're trying to light the webcam, can't see anything, or any visible light camera.
And isn't it true that even in pitch darkness, we'd still be able to work completely fine because we're providing our own light?
That's correct, yeah. In fact, we actually probably work best in pitch black. Now, we have a harder time in heavy light conditions. We're still better than things like the First Connect. So sunlight, that could that could conflict with our, if the sun is brighter than what we're shining, that can be a problem. But we have solutions against that, such as robust mode, which we talked about in an earlier Twitch talk, and as well as seeing this automotive module, which add more LEDs. And there's a number of other algorithmic and as well as hardware improvements to deal with heavy light or bright sunlight or bright halogen lights. All right, let's see where we go back in the questions here. Stream problem resolved. All right. I think we have covered. Tactile feedback from Lotosmith. Okay, so that one difference between gloves is gloves like Control VR. You can create the little things that vibrate on the edge of your fingers, and maybe there's some other solutions out there that even shock you or whatnot on the gloves. Maybe I'll have Alex speak to this, because a lot of people have said it in different ways about the experience, especially with image hands. It actually does relate a lot to that. So
right. So one thing that people have noticed is that the more that something is immersive, the more that your brain kind of tricks yourself into feeling that you're actually touching something. And one thing that a lot of people have reported is that when they're using the image hands and they touch something, they can kind of feel a little bit of tingling. And that's obviously not really proper tactile sensation, but it just goes to show that a really powerful experience can actually elicit an actual feeling without actually having a tactile vibrator or whatever attached to your fingers. And then moving past that, like actually providing a tactile sensation, I think that providing something that shows whether or not you're touching something or whether or not you're performing a gesture is something that's really powerful. Our hands are built for touching and feeling things, and so being able to provide that kind of feedback is really valuable. And there's a couple ways that you can get around that by not having actual tactile feedback. Like, for example, if you want to do a pinching gesture, you're providing your own tactile feedback. You know exactly when you're pinching and exactly when you're not, because you can feel your own fingers. Visual feedback is also a really powerful way. If you make your visual feedback very, very spot on, then by simply visualizing that something's happening when you're doing a gesture or a motion, then again, that just forwards the feeling that you're actually interacting with something. And I guess a good example of that is the intersection effect in the core asset hands. You put your hand into something, it highlights the intersection, and even though you're not actually feeling anything, it just goes that one step further and kind of shows something's happening. You should be feeling something, and you kind of do.
Okay, yeah, great. And I guess one thing when I with Plasma Ball on our gallery a year or so ago, yeah, that feeling, people would really report that feeling of feeling like there's a plasma ball there, or something was they were feeling on their hands, and the effect was the visual effect, but also the sound effect was like this humming sound of the plasma ball as well. So, so yeah, there are things once you get 3 or more senses working together, you can have to feel this phantom object there. So I think our current assets don't really give you any sound for interacting with objects, but that could be a direction we take it, or maybe you could try that out and see where that goes. Kraken points out that Glove 1 has haptic feedback work with Leap Motion, right? Glove 1 is a glove that works with other sensing devices like Kinect or Leap Motion. So the haptic feedback's on there, whereas the tracking is via Leap Motion. And there's actually some tracking in the hands via accelerometers, but accelerometers don't do so well for detecting drift. So it's not just like control VR by itself, like what's the point of Leap Motion? No, there is a point for better tracking. Once you bring in image hands, there's even a point for just like lower latency seeing your hands. So yeah, that's one solution, is to combine gloves with Leap Motion. And one other solution I'll point out here, so there's a company, let's see if I have the name right, Haptic, it's called Ultra Haptics. So Ultra Haptic technology, so I've linked an article here from, looks like last year, December, and so people have, we even have even worked on trying to do haptic feedback via, you could have a bunch of microphones and then, sorry, not microphones, speakers, mini speakers, and then try to put that sensation where the object is. The classic things from decades ago could make this very expensive with this array of actuators or basically speakers. But Ultra Haptics has found ways to miniaturize this, and their demo is Leap Motion for tracking, and then using their device to have this vibration sensation to any point in space. So that's sort of a combined Leap Motion and haptic feedback solution that doesn't require wearing any gloves. And their current demo is not in virtual reality, but eventually when this gets even smaller, which is what they've kind of demonstrated, that it's a lot smaller than it used to be, you could see that possibly even on a headset where you can feel your hands. All right.
We got 2 minutes?
We have 2 minutes.
Oh.
Looks like any questions in the backlog? Let's see. Problem resolved. All right. We covered feet not working and tool tracking. All right. I think we've covered our backlog, but if you guys have any questions, why don't you just post them in the channel now? A couple new users here. Unfortunately, we didn't hear from Pizixta or Punkerella Summers or the Keithy. But yeah, we'd love to hear from developers. If not here, so you can always check out the forums at community.leapmotion.com. All right, maybe we could wrap up early then. All right, are we supposed to press a button here?
No,
Yes,
no,
we
no. Question.
Oh, question. Oh, any future plans for Twitch streams? Maybe you could answer that.
Always check our community forums. We always launch what we're going to do then. It's every 2 weeks. So you can say that.
Always check our community forum? Okay.
Yeah.
It'll be in okay, probably every couple of weeks. So yeah, check back on our forums. So gesture assets. It's hard to answer in a minute or so, but yeah, gestures versus widgets. You can say what we're adding and what we're updating.
I'm not actually aware of any updates to or widgets or gestures in general.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing to clarify is that gestures is kind of our old API that didn't interact with the world that you'd say, like, here's a tap and here's where the tap is.
Right.
But widgets work better where you do require the object to be there, and there's a model even using the physics engine. And those are widgets. They kind of replace gestures in a way. They do require a full engine, or at least part of an engine, but they work well. And the current widgets we have, I mean, yeah, it does pretty much everything you need. But if you need more, post a link on the forums, and we'll talk about ways we can modify those or extend them. And that, not just for widgets, but for anything. We'd love to hear your feedback and see what you need.
And then you got a couple last minute questions. One directed at Alex.
No, sorry, VR device was already answered. The Razer OS VR headset, Leap Motion, will be a part of that. So that has been answered. And you're going to be on tonight, Alex.
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. Okay.
Trials by Fire is a friend of mine.
Okay, all right. That's a wrap.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.